The Montana sun beat down merciless on the dried earth, same as it had every summer since June Calloway could remember. She stood in the doorway of what used to be her family's ranch house, watching dust devils dance across the empty corrals where prize horses once pranced and whinnied. The bank notice crumpled in her fist had arrived 3 days ago, but she'd known this moment was coming for months. "Ain't nothing left here but ghosts," she muttered, running her fingers along the rough wood of the door frame. Her sleeve rode up, revealing the thick, rope-like scar that twisted from her wrist to her shoulder. A year had passed since that morning when Thunder, her father's stallion, had thrown her into the fence posts. The physical pain had faded, but the way folks looked at her now, with pity or disgust, that hurt worse than any broken bone ever could. From the barn came a sharp whinny, followed by the sound of hooves striking wood. June sighed. At least Raven was still hers. The black mare was too wild for most buyers, too unpredictable for ranch work. Just like June herself, her mother used to say, though back then it was said with pride instead of worry. She walked to the barn, her boots kicking up small clouds with each step. Inside, Raven paced her stall like a caged mountain cat, eyes rolling white at the edges. The mare had been this way since the fever took June's parents 6 months back. Restless, angry, mourning in her own way. "Easy, girl," June crooned, unlatching the stall door. "We're leaving today. No more watching strangers pick through our home like vultures at a carcass." The mare snorted but allowed June to slip the bridle over her head. As June tightened the cinch on the worn saddle, she caught sight of the old leather saddlebag hanging on a peg, her father's, from his younger days riding the territory. She pulled it down, dust motes dancing in the shaft of sunlight from the barn door. Inside, she found what she'd hoped for, his collection of letters, tied with twine. Most were from her mother during their courting days, but at the bottom lay an envelope with different handwriting, official-looking, government seal. June opened it carefully, squinting at the formal script. "To Samuel Calloway, your reputation as a horseman and honest citizen has reached our offices. We write to offer you a position at our new outpost near Fort Laramie. The post requires a man of integrity to help establish order in the territories. Should you accept, you would oversee the cavalry mounts and assist in patrol duties. The position includes lodging and fair wages." The letter was dated 5 years past. Her father had never mentioned it, probably because by then June's mother was already showing signs of the weakness that would eventually claim her. Samuel Calloway would never have left his wife, not for all the government positions in the West. But June had no such ties now. No family, no ranch, nothing but a scarred arm and a half-wild horse. She studied the letter again, noting the sender's name, Colonel James Morrison, Commanding Officer, Wyoming Territorial Outpost. "What do you think, Raven?" she asked, folding the letter and tucking it into her shirt. "Feel like seeing Wyoming." The mare stamped, eager to be away from the stall that had confined her. June understood the feeling. This ranch had become her own stall, keeping her penned in with memories and pitying looks from the few neighbors who still came around. She loaded the saddlebag with her few possessions, a change of clothes, her mother's silver brush, a knife that had belonged to her grandfather, and the small leather pouch containing the $30 that represented everything her parents had left her. The bank had taken the land, the livestock, even most of the furniture, but they couldn't take her pride, scarred as it might be. In the kitchen, she wrapped some hardtack and dried beef in oilcloth. Her hands moved automatically to the stove, checking that the fire was out, before she remembered there was no point. Tomorrow, strangers would be living here. They'd probably tear down her mother's climbing roses and plow under the herb garden. "I'd rather sleep under the stars with a burn on my shoulder than live in a kitchen full of men who flinch at my scars," she said to the empty room, slinging her saddlebag over Raven's side. She led the mare out of the barn and mounted in one smooth motion, her body remembering the rhythm even after a year of being told she was too damaged for real riding. Her bad arm protested as she gripped the reins, but she ignored it, Pain was just another companion on the trail, no different from hunger or cold. As they turned onto the main road, June didn't look back. She'd said her goodbyes at her parents' graves that morning, kneeling in the dusty cemetery while the dawn light painted the mountains purple. Her mother would understand. Her father, too, in his way. They'd raised her to be strong, to stand on her own feet. They just hadn't expected she'd need to do it so soon, or so alone. The road stretched out before them, rutted and dry. Wyoming was at least 2 weeks' ride, maybe 3 if she was careful with Raven. She had no guarantee that this Colonel Morrison would honor a 5-year-old letter sent to a dead man. But she had his name, and the location of the outpost, and the growing certainty that anything was better than staying here, watching her life fold in on itself like a dying flower. As the sun climbed higher, June pulled her hat low over her eyes and let Raven find her own pace. The mare seemed to sense they were truly leaving, her gait smoothing out into the ground-eating stride that had made her father's horses famous across 3 counties. "That's my girl," June murmured. "Show them we're not broken, just bent a little." The scar on her arm ached in the heat, a reminder of everything she'd lost and everything she still had to prove. But as the miles fell away behind them and the mountains rose up ahead, June felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. It was small and fragile, like a candle flame in the wind. But it was there. Wyoming waited, with its promises of new beginnings and fresh starts. And if those promises proved false, well, she and Raven would face that together too. After all, June Calloway was her father's daughter, her mother's pride, and she'd be hung before she'd let a little thing like a scar and some hard luck keep her down. The letter in her shirt pressed against her ribs with each of Raven's strides, a paper talisman against an uncertain future. Colonel Morrison might send her away. The men at the outpost might take one look at her scarred arm and woman's face and laugh, but she'd deal with that when it came. For now, there was just the road, the horse, and the wide Montana sky slowly giving way to Wyoming territory. June Calloway was riding again, and that was enough. The Wyoming wind hit June like a slap from an angry god. After 2 weeks of hard riding, she and Raven stood on a rise overlooking the most desolate stretch of land she'd ever seen. The grass grew sparse and brittle, barely reaching her boot tops, and the horizon seemed to stretch on forever without a single tree to break the monotony. Below, nestled against a low hill like it was trying to hide from the wind, sat the outpost. It wasn't much, a main building of rough-hewn logs, a smaller structure that might be a barracks, a stable that looked ready to blow over, and what appeared to be a supply shed. A flag snapped violently from a pole, the only sign of life in the whole forsaken place. "Well, Raven," June said, her voice hoarse from days of dust and silence. "We found it." The mare snorted, pawing at the hard ground. Even she seemed unimpressed. As they descended toward the outpost, June became aware of eyes watching from the windows. By the time she reached the main building, 6 men had assembled on the porch. They were a rough lot, bearded, sun-weathered, clothes that had seen better decades. Not one of them smiled. "Help you, miss." The speaker was a thin man with sergeant stripes, his voice carefully neutral but his eyes taking in every detail of her appearance. The road dust, the saddlebags, the way she held her scarred arm slightly away from her body. June dismounted, trying not to wince as her boots hit the ground. Every bone in her body ached from the journey. "I'm looking for Colonel Morrison," she said, pulling the letter from inside her shirt. "Colonel Morrison's been dead 2 years, the sergeant replied. "Lakota Arrow. We got Captain Ransom in charge now." June felt her heart sink, but kept her face steady. "Then I need to speak with Captain Ransom." The men exchanged glances, and one of them, a stocky fellow with a permanent squint, actually chuckled. "Cal ain't gonna like this," he muttered. "Shut it, Dixon," the sergeant snapped. He turned back to June. "Captain's inside, but I should warn you, miss, this ain't no place for—" "For a woman," June finished. I've heard that before. She tied Raven to the hitching post and climbed the steps, noting how the men parted to let her pass but kept staring. The inside of the building was dim and smelled of tobacco, leather, and unwashed men. A large desk dominated one corner, behind which sat a man who could only be Captain Ransom. He was writing in a ledger, not looking up even as June's boots announced her entrance. "Whatever you're selling, we're not buying," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "I'm not selling anything," June replied. "I'm here about a position." Now he looked up, and June found herself meeting the steadiest pair of gray eyes she'd ever seen. Captain Calvin Ransom was younger than she'd expected, maybe 35, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face that might have been handsome if it wasn't set in such harsh lines. When he stood, she noticed the slight hitch in his movement, the way he favored his left leg. "A position," he repeated, like she'd said something in a foreign language. June stepped forward and placed the letter on his desk. As he read, his expression didn't change, but she saw his jaw tighten slightly. "This offer was for Samuel Calloway," he said finally. "My father, he's dead. I'm sorry for your loss." The words were rote, automatic. "But that doesn't mean I can do everything he could have done." June interrupted. "I can ride, shoot, tend horses, mend tack. I know the difference between Lakota and Cheyenne arrow fletching, can track deer across rock, and I make a better pot of coffee than any man you've got here." "We have a cook," Ransom said. "Do you, because this place smells like burned beans and despair?" A sound came from the doorway. Might have been a cough, might have been a laugh. The sergeant stood there, trying to look serious. "Sorry, Cap," he said, "but she ain't wrong about the beans." Ransom's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes might have softened a fraction. He studied June again, his gaze lingering on her arm, where the scar showed below her rolled sleeve. "You're injured," he observed. June felt heat rise to her face. "I'm healed. It doesn't affect my work." "And you rode here alone from Montana?" "I did. That's either very brave or very foolish." "Sometimes they're the same thing," June said, meeting his gaze steadily. Silence stretched between them. Outside, the wind rattled the windows and sent dust devils spinning across the yard. Finally, Ransom sat back down, the chair creaking under his weight. "We don't have quarters for a woman," he said. "You'd have to make do with the supply shed. It's got a stove, but not much else." Hope flared in June's chest, but she kept her voice level. "I've slept in worse places." "The men won't like it. A woman here. It complicates things." "I cook. I don't need them to like me," June said, echoing what she'd already decided on the long ride here. Ransom was quiet for another long moment, then nodded once. Sharp and decisive. 3-month trial. You cook, you help with the horses, you keep to yourself. First sign of trouble, you're gone. Payment is $20 a month plus board. Fair enough. June tried not to let her relief show. "Thompson," Ransom called to the sergeant. "Show Miss Calloway to the supply shed. Have Dixon clear out whatever's stored there." Thompson nodded. "Yes, sir. Come on, miss." As June turned to follow him, Ransom spoke again. "One more thing. The men here are rough, but they're not animals. Anyone gives you trouble. You come to me, clear." "Clear," June said, surprised by the offer. Outside, Thompson helped her unsaddle Raven and showed her to a small stall in the stable. The mare rolled her eyes at the unfamiliar surroundings, but settled when June spoke softly to her. "She's a beauty," Thompson observed. "Bit wild-looking, though." "We suit each other," June replied. The supply shed was exactly as advertised. 4 walls, a roof that probably leaked, a small stove, and shelves lined with sacks of flour and beans. Dixon grumbled as he relocated the supplies, shooting June dark looks. "This is a mistake," he muttered, loud enough for her to hear. "Women got no business out here." Neither do men who can't cook a pot of beans, June shot back. Thompson actually smiled at that. You'll do all right. Miss, just keep your head down and your wit sharp. The captain's a fair man, even if he don't show it much. What happened to his leg? June asked, curious despite herself. Same thing that happened to Colonel Morrison. Lakota raid, 2 years back. Arrow went clean through his thigh. He's lucky he can walk at all. Thompson lowered his voice. Changed him, though. Used to smile sometimes. Before. As the sun set over the desolate landscape, June stood in the doorway of her new home. It wasn't much, barely better than a chicken coop, but it was a start. Through the single window, she could see the main building where lamplight was beginning to glow. Captain Ransom's silhouette moved past a window, and she wondered what had driven him to accept her, even provisionally. From the stable, Raven whinnied, probably complaining about the strange quarters. June knew how she felt. Everything here was hard edges and suspicious looks, as unforgiving as the landscape itself. But she'd made it this far, and she'd be damned if she'd fail now. Tomorrow, she'd face 6 hungry men in a kitchen she'd never seen before. Tomorrow, she'd start proving that June Calloway was worth more than her scars and her sex. But tonight, as the Wyoming wind howled around her little shed and the first stars appeared in the vast sky, she allowed herself one moment of quiet triumph. She was here, against all odds and expectations. She was here. I cook. I don't need them to like me, she whispered to the darkness, making it a promise. The kitchen at dawn was a battlefield of crusted pots and mysteries June didn't want to identify. She stood in the doorway, lamp in hand, surveying the damage with the same feeling she'd had looking at Thunder after he'd thrown her, a mix of determination and dread. Lord help me, she muttered, rolling up her sleeves. The scar pulled tight as she moved, but she ignored it. There was work to do. By the time the men stumbled in for breakfast, drawn by the smell of coffee that didn't taste like boiled dirt, June had transformed the space. Pots gleamed on the stove. The table was actually clean. And biscuits, real biscuits, not the hardtack they'd been gnawing, sat golden in a pan. Well, I'll be damned, Thompson said, stopping short in the doorway. The others pushed past him, Dixon included, their suspicious looks giving way to something like hunger. Only Captain Ransom held back, leaning against the doorframe, watching her work with those unreadable gray eyes. Sit, June said, not really a request. Food's getting cold. They sat, they ate, and for blessed minutes. The only sound was forks on tin plates and the occasional grunt of appreciation. June stayed by the stove, her back to them, but she could feel the shift in the room's atmosphere. Food had a way of doing that, making men remember they were human. Where'd you learn to cook like this? Asked Corporal Mills, a young man with sandy hair and an eager face. My mother, June replied, refilling the coffee pot. She said a good meal could solve half the world's problems. What about the other half? Dixon asked, his tone still sharp but less hostile than yesterday. That's what whiskey's for, June said dryly, and Thompson actually laughed. The days fell into rhythm. June rose before dawn, cooked, cleaned, then spent the afternoons in the stable. The horses were in sorry shape, hooves untrimmed, coats dull with neglect. The men had been doing the minimum, she could tell, just enough to keep the animals functional. It was there, in the quiet of the stable, that June felt most herself. Horses didn't care about scars or improper women in military outposts. They only cared that her hands were gentle and her voice was steady. She found the forgotten one in the back stall, a bay gelding with a slight sway in his back and ribs showing through his coat. His nameplate read Jasper, but the men called him useless when they mentioned him at all. Hey there, boy, June crooned, entering the stall slowly. The horse pinned his ears but didn't move. His left foreleg was swollen at the fetlock, and June could see why he'd been abandoned. A horse that couldn't work wasn't worth feeding. Not out here. She spent the next hour cleaning the wound she found hidden under the dirt and matted hair, whispering nonsense to keep him calm. When she finally emerged, she found Captain Ransom standing in the stable aisle, his expression unreadable as always. "That horse is done for," he said. "Maybe," June replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "Maybe not. Won't know unless someone tries." "We don't have resources to waste on maybes." June met his gaze steadily. "I'll use my own grain ration if it comes to that, but I don't think it will. Sometimes things just need proper tending." Something flickered across his face. Might have been surprise, might have been something else. He turned without another word and limped back to the main building, leaving June to wonder what went on behind those storm-gray eyes. The first storm came a week later, rolling across the plains like God's own fury. June watched the black clouds approach from her shed's window, feeling the pressure drop in her bones. By the time the first fat raindrops fell, she was already heading to the stable. Raven was pacing, the whites of her eyes showing. The mare had always hated storms, ever since she was a foal. The other horses shifted restlessly, picking up on her anxiety. "Shh, easy girl," June murmured, but her voice was lost in a crack of thunder that shook the whole building. Raven reared, striking out with her front hooves, and June had to dodge quickly to avoid being hit. The stable door banged open, and Thompson appeared, water streaming from his hat. "Need help, miss?" "She'll hurt herself," June said, trying again to approach the panicking mare. "Or the other horses." Another thunder crack, closer this time, and Raven went wild. She kicked the stall door so hard it splintered, then wheeled and slammed into the wall. June didn't think. She just moved, ducking under the flying hooves to press herself against Raven's side, arms around the mare's neck. "Stop!" she commanded, her voice cutting through the storm. "Stop it right now!" The mare trembled but stilled, and June held on, whispering a constant stream of words. She told Raven about Montana summers, about fields of wildflowers, about anything except the storm raging outside. Her bad arm screamed from the strain, but she didn't let go. She didn't know how long they stayed like that. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. The storm passed as quickly as it came, leaving behind the smell of rain on dust and a strange, ringing silence. When June finally released Raven and turned around, she found she had an audience. Thompson, Mills, Dixon, and two others stood outside the broken stall door, and behind them, barely visible in the shadows, Captain Ransom. "Jesus Christ," Dixon breathed. "You could have been killed." June's legs chose that moment to give out. She sat down hard in the straw, her whole body shaking now that the danger was past. The scar on her arm felt like it was on fire. "Get her some whiskey," Ransom ordered, his voice sharp. Then, to June's surprise, he entered the stall himself, moving carefully around Raven to crouch beside her. "Let me see your arm." "It's fine," June said automatically, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Let me see," he repeated, and something in his tone made her comply. She rolled up her sleeve, revealing the angry red scar tissue. His fingers were surprisingly gentle as he examined her arm, checking for new damage. "Just strained," he concluded. "You're lucky." "Luck had nothing to do with it," June said, finding her voice again. "I know my horse." "You whisper to her like she's all you got," he said, so quietly she almost missed it. Their eyes met, and for a moment June saw something in his expression that wasn't coldness or distance, understanding, maybe recognition. Then Thompson returned with the whiskey, and the moment broke. "Drink," Ransom ordered, standing with his characteristic stiffness. "Then get some rest. Storm damage can wait till morning." As the men filed out, Mills lingered. "That was something, miss," he said earnestly. "Never seen anyone handle a spooked horse like that." After they left, June sat in the straw a while longer, sipping the whiskey and watching Raven, who now stood quietly, as if the storm panic had never happened. The mare lowered her head, nuzzling June's hair in what might have been apology. "You and me both, girl," June murmured. "We're both a little broken by storms." When she finally made it back to her shed, June found something on her doorstep, a small bottle of liniment and a note in sharp, angular handwriting for the arm R. She held the bottle up to the lamplight, a smile tugging at her lips despite everything. Captain Calvin Ransom might be as readable as a rock face, but tonight she'd seen a crack in that stone exterior, and like the forgotten horse in the back stall, sometimes things just needed proper tending. The next morning at breakfast, no one mentioned the storm or June's dramatic horse whispering, but she noticed the men looked at her differently now. Less suspicion, more curiosity. Even Dixon nodded when she refilled his coffee. And Captain Ransom, he sat in his usual spot, eating methodically, eyes on his plate. But when June set down fresh biscuits, still warm from the oven, she caught him watching her. He didn't smile. She was beginning to think he'd forgotten how, but he nodded once, a small acknowledgement that felt bigger than words. Progress, June thought, turning back to her stove, like healing a horse or gentling a storm-spooked mare. Progress came in small steps, patient work, and the willingness to hold on even when everything hurt. Her arm still ached, the scar tissue tight and angry, but as she worked, humming softly under her breath, June realized something for the first time since the accident, since her parents' death, since losing everything she'd known. The pain felt like something she could bear. Maybe because, for the first time in a long while, she wasn't bearing it alone. The trouble started on a Saturday night, 3 weeks into June's stay at the outpost. Most of the men had ridden to the nearest town for their monthly revelry, leaving only Private Watson on watch duty. June had stayed behind, as always, using the quiet evening to mend clothes and tend to Jasper's still healing leg. She heard the horses before she saw them, 2 riders coming in hard from the east. Watson must have been dozing because no challenge rang out. June set down her sewing and moved to the window of her shed, peering into the darkness. The riders were soldiers, but not from their outpost. Their uniforms were cleaner, newer, and they dismounted with the loose-limbed confidence of men who'd been drinking. One was tall and lean, the other shorter but broader through the shoulders. They tied their horses carelessly and headed for the main building. June tried to go back to her sewing, but something made her uneasy. After a few minutes, she heard raised voices from the direction of the kitchen. Watson's high, nervous laugh carried on the night air, followed by a deeper, rougher sound she didn't like. Against her better judgment, she walked to the main building. The kitchen door stood open, lamplight spilling out. Inside, the 2 strangers had helped themselves to the food she'd prepared for tomorrow, and Watson sat at the table, clearly uncomfortable but too green to know how to handle the situation. "Well, well," the taller one said, noticing her in the doorway. "Watson didn't mention you had a woman here." June stayed where she was, hand resting on the doorframe. "Kitchen's closed," she said evenly. "There's a town 12 miles west if you're looking for hospitality." The shorter one stood, his chair scraping against the floor. His eyes were glassy with drink, and his smile made June's skin crawl. "Now that's not very friendly. We're all soldiers here, aren't we? Boys." "I'm the cook," June said, "and you're eating tomorrow's breakfast. I'll ask you to leave." "Ask," the tall one laughed. "Hear that? Garrett, she'll ask us." Garrett, the shorter one, took a step toward her. June held her ground. Though every instinct screamed at her to run, running would only make it worse. "Sarge never said nothing about a woman." Watson finally spoke up, his voice cracking. Maybe you should shut your mouth. Private." Garrett cut him off, never taking his eyes off June. "Why don't you run along, let us get acquainted with the lady?" Watson looked between them, torn between duty and fear. June made the decision for him. Go find Captain Ransom, she said quietly. Captain's in town, Watson said miserably. Of course he was. June's heart sank, but she kept her face neutral. Then go to the stable, check on the horses. Watson hesitated, and Garrett laughed. Yeah, boy, run along. We'll take good care of your cook. After Watson fled, June calculated her options. The kitchen knife was too far away. The door behind her was clear, but these men were younger, faster, and drunk enough to think chasing her would be sport. I'm not looking for trouble, she said, hating how her voice shook. Neither are we, Garrett said, moving closer. Just being friendly. Awful lonely out here for a woman. Must get tired of only having these frontier dogs for company. I manage fine. Bet you do. His eyes traveled over her, lingering on her scarred arm. Damaged goods. Huh. That why you're out here no decent man would have you. The words hit like physical blows. But June had heard worse. She'd heard it in the whispers after her accident, in the pitying looks of neighbors, in her own mind during the darkest nights. But hearing it from this whiskey-soaked stranger lit a fire in her chest. Get out, she said, low and firm. Garrett reached for her arm, the scarred one, and June reacted without thinking. She twisted away from his grip and brought her knee up hard into his middle. He doubled over with a grunt of surprise and pain. You little... The tall one started forward, but June was already moving. She grabbed the coffee pot from the stove, still warm from dinner, and swung it at his head. He ducked, but the movement made him stumble. Garrett recovered faster than she'd hoped. His hand caught her wrist, squeezing until she dropped the pot. It clattered on the floor, coffee spreading in a dark pool. That wasn't nice, he breathed, his face too close to hers. Now you're gonna apologize? June did the only thing she could think of. She bit him, hard. Her teeth sank into the meat of his hand, and he yelled, releasing her. She darted for the door, but the tall one caught her around the waist, lifting her off her feet. Feisty thing, he grunted as she struggled. No wonder they keep you around. The kitchen door slammed open with enough force to shake the walls. Captain Ransom stood there, still in his town clothes, his face a mask of cold fury June had never seen before. Behind him, Thompson and Dixon crowded in, equally grim. Put her down, Ransom said, his voice deadly quiet. The tall soldier released June immediately, stepping back with his hands raised. Just having some fun. Captain, no harm meant. No harm. Ransom's eyes went to June, taking in her disheveled appearance, the red marks on her wrist. Something dangerous flickered in his expression. Get out. Now hold on, Garrett started, cradling his bitten hand. She attacked us. Crazy woman came at us for no reason. I said get out. Ransom drew his sidearm, not pointing it but letting it rest against his thigh. You have 10 seconds to get to your horses. The strangers looked at each other, then at the 3 armed men blocking their only exit. Whatever they saw in those faces convinced them. They pushed past, Garrett shooting June a venomous look that promised this wasn't over. After the sound of hoofbeats faded into the night, Ransom holstered his weapon and turned to June. Did they hurt you? No, June said, though her wrist throbbed where Garrett had grabbed it. I'm fine. You're not fine, he said flatly. Thompson, get the medical kit. Dixon, find Watson and find out why he let strangers into my post without authorization. As the men dispersed, Ransom moved closer to June. She expected questions, maybe anger at her for causing trouble. Instead, he simply said, Sit. She sat. Her hands were shaking now, delayed reaction setting in. Ransom poured whiskey from the bottle Thompson kept hidden behind the flour, pushing the glass toward her. Drink, he ordered. When she complied, he continued. Why didn't you run? They would have chased me, June said, the whiskey burning her throat. Men like that, running makes it a game. You've dealt with men like that before. It wasn't a question. June looked up, meeting his gray eyes. Every woman has dealt with men like that. Captain. Thompson returned with the medical supplies, but Ransom waved him off. Taking the kit himself, he examined June's wrist with the same careful touch he'd used on her arm after the storm, applying salve to the bruises already forming. "This shouldn't have happened," he said quietly. "I should have left more men on guard." "You couldn't have known." "It's my job to know." His hand stilled on her wrist. "I brought you here. Your safety is my responsibility." June felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the whiskey. "I can take care of myself." "I saw—" The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Did you really bite him?" "Seemed like the thing to do at the time." "Remind me never to make you angry." He finished wrapping her wrist, his touch lingering a moment longer than necessary. "This won't happen again." "Captain," June started, but he was already standing. "From now on, one of my men will always be on post when I'm gone. And June," he paused at the door, "you did well. Most would have panicked." After he left, June sat in the kitchen, her wrapped wrist cradled against her chest. The spilled coffee had soaked into the floorboards, leaving a stain that would never come out. Tomorrow, she'd scrub it anyway, the way she scrubbed everything here, with determination and the stubborn refusal to be defeated. When Thompson poked his head in later, she was already heating water for the cleaning. "Leave it till morning, miss," he said gently. "You've had enough for one night." "Can't sleep anyway," June replied, not looking up. "Might as well be useful." Thompson was quiet for a moment, then said, "Captain tore into Watson something fierce. Boy's lucky he's not being sent back east in disgrace. And those 2 soldiers Captain sent word to their commanding officer? They won't be bothering anyone again." June nodded, scrubbing harder at the stain. Thompson sighed and left her to it. An hour later, when the kitchen floor was clean and June's wrist ached despite the bandage, she heard footsteps on the porch. Captain Ransom appeared in the doorway, no longer in his town clothes but his usual uniform. "I told you to rest," he said. "And I told you I can take care of myself," June countered. They stared at each other across the spotless kitchen, 2 stubborn souls in a harsh land. Finally, Ransom asked the question June had been dreading all night. "Why ain't you afraid of me?" The question hung in the air between them. June thought of all the possible answers. That she'd seen real evil in Garrett's drunken eyes. That Ransom had shown her nothing but gruff kindness. That fear was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. Instead, she gave him the simplest truth. "Because your eyes flinch before your hands do." Something changed in his expression. A crack in that stone facade that was gone so quickly June might have imagined it. Without another word, he turned and walked out, his uneven gait more pronounced in the late hour. June finished putting away the cleaning supplies, her mind replaying the night's events. She'd been attacked, defended herself, been rescued, and somehow ended up having the strangest conversation of her life with a man who seemed determined to be unreadable. As she walked back to her shed, June noticed a figure sitting on the steps of the main building, Watson, looking miserable in the moonlight. "I'm sorry, miss," he called out. "I should have—" "You should have," June agreed, not sugarcoating it. "But you'll do better next time." "Yes, ma'am, I will." June believed him. They all would do better, because that's what people did out here. They learned, they adapted, they survived, and sometimes, if they were very lucky, they found others who understood that survival was about more than just making it through each day. Her wrist throbbed as she lay down on her narrow cot, but June found herself almost smiling. "Because your eyes flinch before your hands do," she whispered to the darkness, wondering if Captain Calvin Ransom understood what those words really meant, wondering if she understood it herself. The morning started like any other, with June mixing biscuit dough while the coffee perked on the stove. Outside, she could hear the men preparing for rifle practice, their voices carrying on the crisp air. It had been 2 weeks since the incident with the drunken soldiers, and life at the outpost had settled back into its routine. Then the gunfire started. Not the measured shots of practice, but a rapid series of cracks that split the air like thunder. June's hands stilled in the dough as she heard shouting, followed by the sound every frontier dweller learned to fear: horses screaming. She ran outside to find chaos. The men had scattered for cover, returning fire at targets June couldn't see, but it wasn't an attack. Mills was on the ground near the practice range, clutching his shoulder, and Dixon was yelling for everyone to hold fire. What happened? Captain Ransom emerged from the main building, his voice cutting through the confusion. Rifle misfired. Thompson reported, spooked Jenkins's mount, threw him into the fence and took off running. That's when June heard it. Raven's distinctive whinny, high and panicked. The gunfire had set her off, and from the sound of crashing wood, she was destroying her stall. Everyone stay back, Ransom ordered as more wood splintered. That mare's lost her mind. June was already running toward the stable. Behind her, someone shouted her name, but she didn't stop. She knew that sound, knew what Raven was capable of when the panic took her. The mare had nearly killed herself during thunderstorms back in Montana. Gunfire was worse. The stable was a disaster. 2 other horses had broken free and were milling in the aisle, eyes rolling. But June only had eyes for the back stall where Raven was throwing herself against the walls, her black coat already streaked with blood from splinters. Easy, girl, easy, June called, but her voice was lost in the mare's screaming. Get back. Thompson had followed her, his face white. She'll kill you. June ignored him, unlatching what was left of the stall door. Raven burst out like a black tornado, hooves striking at anything in reach. The other men scrambled back, but June stood her ground, waiting for the split second she needed. When Raven spun, momentarily off balance, June moved. She grabbed the mare's halter with her good hand, using her body weight to pull Raven's head down. The mare fought, lifting June off her feet, but she held on. Stop! June commanded, her voice cutting through Raven's panic. You stop this right now! For a moment, it seemed to work. Raven's eyes focused on June, recognition flickering. Then another rifle cracked outside. Someone hadn't gotten the ceasefire order, and the mare exploded again. This time, June couldn't dodge fast enough. Raven's shoulders slammed into her, sending her flying into the wall. Pain burst through her already damaged arm. As she hit the wood and slid down, stars dancing in her vision. June! That was Ransom's voice, closer than expected. Through blurred vision, she saw him enter the stable, moving with purpose despite his bad leg. The other men tried to stop him, but he shrugged them off, his eyes never leaving Raven. Get her out, he ordered Thompson, nodding toward June. No, June gasped, struggling to stand. She's my horse, and you're my responsibility. Ransom shot back. He had his pistol drawn, but not raised, his stance careful, calculating. Thompson, now! But June was already moving, using the wall to pull herself up. Every breath hurt, and her bad arm hung useless. But she pushed forward. You shoot her, and I'll never forgive you. Rather have you alive and angry than dead and forgiving, Ransom said grimly. June reached Raven first, throwing her good arm around the mare's neck just as Ransom raised his weapon. Please, she whispered against Raven's sweat-soaked coat. Please, girl, come back to me. The stable went silent, except for Raven's harsh breathing. June could feel the mare trembling, caught between panic and recognition. Behind her, she sensed Ransom's tension, his finger on the trigger. Waiting. That's my girl, June murmured, feeling Raven's muscles slowly unlock. That's my brave girl. No one's going to hurt you. I won't let them. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, Raven's head dropped, exhausted, and June's knees gave out. They went down together, June still holding on, whispering nonsense about Montana summers and wildflower meadows. Jesus Christ. Someone breathed. Might have been Dixon. June became aware of hands on her shoulders, gentle but insistent. Ransom was kneeling beside her, his pistol holstered, his face a study in controlled fear. "Let go," he said quietly. "She's calm now. Let go." "Can't," June admitted. Her good arm had locked around Raven's neck, muscles seizing. "Everything hurts." "I know." His hands moved to her arm, carefully working to release her grip. "Thompson, get the medical kit. Mills, secure that mare, gently. Dixon, I want to know why there was gunfire after I ordered ceasefire." As the men scattered, Ransom helped June lean back against the wall. His hands moved over her ribs, checking for breaks, and she hissed when he found the bruised ones. "Not broken," he concluded, "but close. Your arm." "Same as always," June said, trying for light and failing. "Just angry." "You could have been killed." His voice was flat, but his hands were shaking slightly as he examined her injuries. "That was the most foolish thing I've ever seen." "Second most foolish," June corrected. "First was thinking I could make a life here without trouble finding me." "Trouble didn't find you. You ran straight at it." He sat back on his heels, and June was surprised to see real anger in his eyes. "Do you have any idea what it would have done to the men to watch you die? What it would have?" He stopped abruptly, jaw clenching. "Done to you," June finished softly. He didn't answer, but something in his expression made her chest tight in a way that had nothing to do with bruised ribs. Thompson returned with the medical supplies and a small bottle. "For the pain, Miss." June recognized the laudanum, but shook her head. "Just whiskey. I need to stay clear-headed for Raven." "Raven's fine." Mills called from where he'd secured the mare in an intact stall. "Exhausted and cut up some, but she'll heal." "Like owner, like horse," Ransom muttered, helping June to her feet. She swayed, and he steadied her, his arm careful around her waist. "Can you walk?" "Of course," June said, then promptly proved herself a liar by nearly falling. Without a word, Ransom shifted his grip and lifted her, one arm under her knees, the other supporting her back. June was too surprised to protest. "I can walk," she said belatedly. "No, you can't." He carried her out of the stable, past the gaping men, his expression daring anyone to comment. "And before you argue, remember that I'm the one giving orders here." He carried her not to the infirmary, but to her own shed, kicking the door open and setting her carefully on the cot. The small space had never felt smaller with his presence filling it. "Thompson will check on you in an hour," he said, straightening. "You're off duty for the next 3 days." "And the men need to eat." "The men can survive on hardtack and beans for 3 days. They've done it before." He paused at the door, not quite meeting her eyes. "That mare means everything to you." It wasn't a question, but June answered anyway. "She's all I have left of home." "No," Ransom said quietly. "She's not." Before June could ask what he meant, he was gone, leaving her alone with her pain and confusion. Through the window, she could see him directing the cleanup, his voice carrying on the wind, professional, controlled, giving no sign that he just carried her across the compound like she weighed nothing. Thompson appeared as promised, bearing not just medical supplies, but a tray of food. "Captain's orders," he said, setting it on the small table. "Said you're to eat even if you don't feel like it." "Since when does he care if I eat?" June asked, wincing as Thompson helped her out of her torn shirt. "Since always, Miss." Thompson's voice was matter-of-fact as he examined her ribs. "You just haven't been paying attention." As he worked, wrapping her ribs and treating the various cuts and bruises, Thompson kept up a steady stream of talk. The rifle that misfired had been Watson's boy, hadn't cleaned it properly. Mills's shoulder wound was minor. The captain had dressed down the entire unit for losing control of the situation. "And Raven?" June asked. "Captain's tending her himself," Thompson said, which surprised June more than anything else that day. When Thompson left, June lay back carefully, every movement an adventure in pain. Through her small window, she could see the stable door. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, she saw Ransom emerge, his uniform dusty, his sleeves rolled up. He glanced toward her shed, and for a moment their eyes met across the distance. Then he nodded once and walked away, his limp more pronounced than usual. June closed her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, she replayed the day's events, trying to understand the fear in Ransom's voice when he'd thought she might die, the care in his hands as he'd tended her injuries, the weight of that final no when she'd said Raven was all she had left. Her arm throbbed, her ribs ached, and her head spun from exhaustion, but underneath the pain was something else, something warm and dangerous, and absolutely impossible given who she was and where they were. "Sweetheart, you're stronger than a Mustang," she whispered to the darkness, remembering the words he'd said after their first crisis together. Back then, she'd thought he meant her physical strength, her ability to endure. Now, lying in her narrow cot with bruises blooming across her skin and her heart doing strange things in her chest, June wondered if Calvin Ransom had meant something else entirely, and whether she was strong enough to find out. The rumors reached the outpost on a blazing Tuesday afternoon, carried by a supply wagon driver who seemed to relish the telling. June was back in the kitchen, her ribs still tender but functional, when she heard the man's loud voice through the open window. "Yes, sir. Whole town's talking about it. Government outpost keeping a woman for the soldiers' pleasure. Course. What else would a scarred-up female be doing out here?" June's hand stilled on the bread she was kneading. Through the window, she could see the driver talking to Mills and Watson, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. "That ain't true," Watson protested. "Miss Calloway's our cook, nothing more." "Sure, boy," the driver winked. "Whatever helps you sleep at night." June forced herself to keep working, but her hands shook as she shaped the loaves. She'd known this would happen eventually. A woman alone among men, especially a damaged woman. People would draw their own conclusions. By evening, the tension in the outpost was thick as summer honey. The men avoided her eyes at dinner. Conversation stilted and strange. Even Thompson seemed uncomfortable, clearing his throat every time he looked her way. "Something wrong with the food?" June asked finally, tired of the awkwardness. "No, miss," Dixon mumbled into his plate. "Food's fine." Captain Ransom hadn't appeared for dinner, which was unusual. June packaged a plate for him and walked to the main building, knocking on his office door. "Come." She found him at his desk, writing by lamplight. He looked up as she entered, and she saw something dangerous in his expression. "You missed dinner," she said, setting the plate on his desk. "I wasn't hungry." His voice was controlled, but June had learned to read the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand gripped the pen too tightly. "You heard what that driver was saying." It wasn't a question. Ransom set down his pen carefully, as if he didn't trust himself with it. "I heard. And tomorrow I'll ride to town and correct some misconceptions." "You'll make it worse," June said quietly. "Men like that, they believe what they want to believe. You defending my honor will only convince them they're right." "Then what would you have me do?" The control cracked slightly, frustration bleeding through. "Let them spread their poison." "Yes." June met his gaze steadily. "Because I don't care what they think. I care what you think, what the men here think." "The men here know better." "Do they?" June gestured toward the door. "They could barely look at me at dinner." Ransom stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He moved to the window, his back to her, hands clasped behind him in that military stance she'd come to recognize as his way of maintaining control. "This is my fault," he said. "I should have foreseen this. A woman in a military outpost. It was always going to invite speculation." "So what now?" June asked. "Do you send me away?" He turned sharply, and the look on his face made her breath catch. "Is that what you want?" "I asked you first." They stared at each other across the lamplit room, the air between them charged with things unsaid. Finally, Ransom moved back to his desk, but he didn't sit. 3 days from now, there's a town meeting, discussing the new telegraph line routes. I'm required to attend, and I'm taking Thompson and Mills. He paused. "I want you to come too." June blinked, surprised. "Why?" "Because hiding you here only feeds the rumors. If the good people of Cedar Ridge want to gossip about the outpost cook, they can do it to your face." "Captain, wear your best dress." He continued as if she hadn't spoken. "We'll take dinner at the hotel, public as you please. Let them see you're a respectable woman, not some—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "Not some army trophy." June finished for him. "All right, but I only have one dress, and it's nothing fancy." "It'll do." June turned to leave, then paused. "Captain, thank you." "For what?" "For not believing it. The rumors." Something shifted in his expression, a vulnerability quickly hidden. "Anyone who spent 5 minutes with you would know better. June." It was the first time he'd used her given name. The sound of it in his rough voice did strange things to her insides. 3 days later, June found herself sitting beside Thompson on the wagon seat, wearing her one good dress, a simple blue calico she'd mended twice over. Captain Ransom rode alongside on his gray gelding, his uniform pressed and proper, looking every inch the military commander. Cedar Ridge wasn't much of a town on Main Street, a hotel that had seen better days, a mercantile, 2 saloons, and a church that doubled as the meeting hall. But it might as well have been Denver for all the attention their arrival drew. June felt the eyes following them as they made their way to the hotel. Women peered from behind curtains. Men lounged against posts with knowing smirks. She kept her chin high, her shoulders back, refusing to shrink under their scrutiny. The hotel dining room was nearly full when they entered. Conversation stuttered to a halt, then resumed in hushed whispers. Ransom guided their party to a prominent table by the window, his hand briefly touching June's elbow as he pulled out her chair. "Relax," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. "You look like you're facing a firing squad." "Feels like it," June muttered back, earning what might have been a smile from him. The waitress, a pinch-faced woman named Mrs. Harrow, approached their table with obvious reluctance. Her eyes lingered on June's scarred arm, visible where the sleeve pulled back. "Captain," she said coolly, "gentlemen, and—" "Miss Calloway," Ransom said, his tone brooking no argument. "She manages our kitchen at the outpost. Best cook this side of the Missouri." "I'm sure." "Mrs.," Harrow said, her smile tight. "What can I bring you?" They ordered, and conversation gradually resumed around them. Thompson and Mills did their best to act normal, discussing the weather and the upcoming harvest, but June could feel the weight of judgment in the room. Halfway through the meal, the moment she'd been dreading arrived. A group of riders entered the dining room, rough-looking men June recognized from her journey into town. Their leader was a thick-set man with cold eyes and a badge that said deputy. His gaze found their table immediately, and his smile was unpleasant. Well, Captain Ransom, heard you were coming to town." His eyes slid to June. "Brought your woman, I see." The room went silent again. June saw Ransom's hand tighten on his fork, the knuckles white. "Miss Calloway is an employee of the United States Army," Ransom said, each word precise as a blade. "I'd ask you to address her with appropriate respect." "Respect," the deputy repeated, laughing. "That what they're calling it now?" He moved closer, his men spreading out behind him. June recognized the formation. They were looking for trouble, probably drunk despite the early hour. "Heard some interesting stories about your outpost, Captain, about late-night visits to the stable. A woman who'll do anything to calm a wild horse. His leer made the implication clear. June started to stand, but Ransom's hand on her wrist stopped her. When he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. "Deputy Morrison, is it you're speaking about a lady in my employ? The daughter of Samuel Calloway, who served this territory with distinction. I'll give you one chance to apologize." "Or what?" Morrison challenged. "You'll defend her honor. Seems to me a woman with honor wouldn't be living with 6 men in the middle of nowhere." The crack of Ransom's fist connecting with Morrison's jaw was loud as a gunshot. The deputy went down hard, blood spurting from his nose. His men started forward, but Thompson and Mills were already standing, hands on their weapons. "Anyone else have opinions about Miss Calloway's honor?" Ransom asked conversationally. Shaking out his hand, "I'm happy to discuss them outside." No one moved. Morrison groaned from the floor, one hand to his face. "I believe you owe the lady an apology," Ransom continued, standing over the fallen deputy. "Unless you'd prefer to explain to Judge Carter how you came to be harassing Army personnel in the performance of their duties." Morrison struggled to his feet, aided by his men. His nose was definitely broken, blood staining his shirt. He mumbled something that might have been an apology, then stumbled out, his men trailing behind. The dining room remained frozen for a long moment. Then June never saw who started clapping. Slowly, tentatively, but clapping nonetheless. A few others joined in, though many still looked scandalized. Ransom returned to his seat as if nothing had happened, picking up his fork with his uninjured hand. "The beef's getting cold," he observed. June stared at him. "Your hand is fine." He met her eyes, and what she saw there made her breath catch. "No one speaks about you that way. Not in my presence." "Cal," she said softly, using his given name for the first time. "You didn't have to." "Yes," he said simply. "I did." The rest of the meal passed in relative quiet. A few townspeople stopped by their table to chat, pointedly including June in the conversation. The message had been received, and June Calloway was under Captain Ransom's protection, and he took that protection seriously. As they prepared to leave for the meeting, an elderly woman June didn't recognize approached their table. Her eyes were kind, her smile genuine. "You're the woman who gentles horses," she said. "My grandson works at the telegraph office. He saw you ride in on that black mare last month. Said it was the prettiest bit of horsemanship he'd ever seen." June felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you, ma'am." "My Anna died 2 years back," the woman continued. "She was the best rider in 3 counties. Didn't let nothing stop her, not even when folks said it wasn't proper." She patted June's hand. "You remind me of her. Don't let the small-minded folks get you down, dear." After the woman left, June excused herself to compose herself. In the hotel's small powder room, she stared at her reflection, the scar on her arm, the calluses on her hands, the sun-weathered face that would never be called beautiful. But she also saw the steel in her spine, the pride in her bearing. She was June Calloway, daughter of Samuel and Mary. She could gentle wild horses and face down drunk soldiers. She could cook for 6 men and earn their respect. She could make Calvin Ransom defend her honor in public, even though it went against every regulation he lived by. When she returned to the dining room, she found Ransom waiting alone by the door. Thompson and Mills had gone ahead to secure seats at the meeting. "Ready?" he asked. "Cal," she said, making him look at her. "What you did, it'll cause trouble for you. Morrison has friends." "Let me worry about Morrison." He offered his arm, a gesture so formal and old-fashioned it made her heart twist. "Shall we?" June placed her hand on his arm, feeling the solid strength beneath the uniform fabric. Together they walked out of the hotel and into the dusty street, where the entire town seemed to be watching. Let them watch, June thought, her chin high. Let them see that she was no fallen woman, no army plaything. She was the woman who cooked their meals and gentled their horses and had earned the protection of a man who didn't give it lightly. And if she was also the woman who was falling in love with her commanding officer despite every rational reason not to, well, that was her secret to keep, at least for now. The morning was bitter cold, frost painting the grass silver and making every breath visible in the air. June had risen even earlier than usual, unable to sleep after the nightmares that had plagued her. In her dreams, she was back in Montana, watching her parents' faces fade behind fever-bright eyes while she stood helpless. She was starting the coffee when she heard it, a child crying somewhere outside the outpost walls. June grabbed her shawl and stepped outside. Following the sound, dawn was just breaking, painting the sky in pale pastels. The crying led her around the stable to where the land dipped toward a small creek. There, caught in what looked like a hunter's trap, was a boy who couldn't have been more than 10 years old. His ankle was twisted at an ugly angle in the metal teeth, blood seeping through his worn moccasins. He was Lakota, she realized, recognizing the pattern on his torn shirt. "Easy," June said softly, approaching like she would a spooked horse. "Easy now. I won't hurt you." The boy's eyes were wild with pain and fear, but he stopped struggling as she knelt beside him. June examined the trap, her stomach turning. Who set traps this close to the outpost, this close to where anyone might walk? "I need to get help," she said, though she wasn't sure he understood English. "Captain, I need the captain." But when she started to rise, the boy grabbed her sleeve, shaking his head frantically. His fear of the soldiers was greater than his pain. "All right," June soothed. "All right, I'll try myself." She'd seen her father free animals from traps before, but never a child, never with hands that shook like hers did now. The mechanism was simple but cruel. The harder the victim pulled, the tighter it gripped. "This is going to hurt," she warned, positioning her hands on the springs. The boy watched her with dark eyes, tears still streaming but silent now. June pressed down with all her strength. The trap loosened just enough for the boy to pull free, crying out as his injured ankles scraped against the metal teeth. Then the springs slipped from her grip, snapping shut on empty air. The boy collapsed, cradling his ankle. June could see it was bad, not broken, maybe, but badly torn and already swelling. "We need to get you help," she said. But the boy shook his head again, trying to stand. He made it 2 steps before crumpling. That's when she heard the horses. Captain Ransom rounded the corner at a run, his bad leg barely slowing him. Behind him came Thompson and Watson, all armed, all alert. They must have heard the boy's cry. Ransom pulled up short when he saw the scene. June kneeling beside a Lakota child, blood on her hands, the sprung trap gleaming in the morning light. "He was caught," June explained quickly. "His ankles torn up bad." Ransom holstered his weapon and moved forward slowly, his movements careful and non-threatening. The boy tried to scramble away, but couldn't manage it with his injury. "Watson, get the medical kit," Ransom ordered quietly. "Thompson, check the perimeter. I want to know if he's alone." "Cal," June said. "He's terrified. He thinks—" "I know what he thinks." Ransom knelt on the boy's other side, his voice gentling. He said something in what June recognized as Lakota, his pronunciation careful but understandable. The boy's eyes widened in surprise. He responded hesitantly, gesturing toward his ankle and then the direction of the hills. "His name is Joseph Crow Feather," Ransom translated. "His family's camped 2 miles north. He was hunting rabbits, got turned around in the dark." "Who sets traps this close to?" June began, then stopped as understanding dawned. "Morrison." Ransom's jaw tightened. "Most likely, he's been trying to provoke an incident with the Lakota for months. A hurt child would certainly do it." Watson returned with the medical supplies. Ransom spoke to the boy again in Lakota, apparently explaining what they needed to do. Joseph nodded, jaw set with a courage that reminded June painfully of herself at that age, trying to be brave when everything hurt. "Hold him still," Ransom instructed June. This is going to be bad. It was. The boy bit down on the leather strap Ransom offered him, his small body rigid with pain as they cleaned and wrapped the ankle. June held his hand, whispering the same nonsense she used with Raven during storms. When it was done, Joseph was pale and shaking but conscious. Ransom sat back, his own face drawn with the effort of kneeling on his bad leg. "We need to return him to his people," he said, "before they come looking and find that trap." "I'll saddle the horses," Thompson offered, but Ransom shook his head. "No, I'll take him myself. Just me." He looked at June. "And you?" "Captain," Thompson protested. "That's not safe. If they think we hurt the boy." "Which is why I'm taking Miss Calloway." Ransom interrupted. "A woman's presence might keep things calm." June understood. A military unit returning an injured Lakota child looked like a threat or a trap. A man and woman looked like something else, something less threatening. 20 minutes later, they rode out, Ransom on his gray, the boy secured in front of him, and June on Raven. The black mare was surprisingly calm, as if she sensed the importance of the moment. They found the camp exactly where Joseph had indicated, a small cluster of teepees sheltered by a grove of cottonwoods. Women and children scattered at their approach, but the men stepped forward, weapons visible but not raised. Ransom called out in Lakota, his voice carrying clearly. June couldn't understand the words, but she heard Joseph's name, saw how the boy straightened despite his pain. A woman broke from the group, Joseph's mother, clearly from the way she ran toward them. Behind her came an older man, his face weathered but dignified, eagle feathers in his gray-streaked hair. Ransom dismounted carefully, lifting Joseph down and carrying him toward his family. He spoke at length with the older man, the chief, June realized, gesturing back toward the outpost and to Joseph's bandaged ankle. The conversation seemed to go on forever. June stayed mounted, aware of the eyes watching her, the weapons that could end her life in a heartbeat if this went wrong. But she kept her hands steady, her expression calm, trusting Ransom to navigate this dangerous moment. Finally, the chief nodded. He said something that made Ransom's shoulders relax fractionally. Joseph's mother took her son, tears streaming down her face as she examined his injury. Then the chief spoke again. Gesturing toward June, Ransom translated. He asks about the woman who helped his grandson. June dismounted slowly, approaching with careful steps. The chief studied her, taking in her scarred arm, her work-worn hands, the way she moved like someone who understood pain. He spoke, and Ransom translated. He says you have gentle hands, like a healer. Tell him I only did what anyone would do, June said. The chief's eyes crinkled slightly. Apparently, he understood more English than he let on. He reached into a pouch at his waist and pulled out something small, pressing it into June's hand. A small carved horse, no bigger than her thumb, made from some dark stone. For the horsewoman, the chief said in accented English. For kindness. They stayed long enough to ensure Joseph was settled, to explain about the trap and Morrison's likely involvement. The chief's face darkened at that news, but he nodded understanding when Ransom promised to handle it. The ride back was silent until they were out of sight of the camp. Then Ransom spoke, his voice rough. It hurts. June realized she'd been cradling her bad arm again. The morning's exertions had set it aching. You did well back there. With the boy and the camp, not many would have stayed so calm. I wasn't calm, June admitted. I was terrified. But you didn't show it. That's what matters. He paused. Morrison's going to hear about this. He'll make trouble. Let him, June said, surprising herself with the vehemence. That trap could have caught anyone. A child from town. One of our men. It was meant to catch exactly who it caught, Ransom said grimly, and create an incident that would justify driving the Lakota further from their lands. They were approaching the outpost when June spoke again. Your Lakota is very good. Colonel Morrison insisted all his officers learn. Said we couldn't keep peace with people we couldn't talk to. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Ironic, given how he died. Not ironic, June said softly. Tragic. They dismounted in the stable, and June noticed Ransom favoring his bad leg more than usual. The cold and the morning's exertions had taken their toll. It hurts, she asked, echoing his earlier question. He looked at her, something shifting in his expression. It hurts, but I want more. The words hung between them, layered with meaning June didn't quite dare to unpack. She stepped closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. More what? She whispered. His hand came up, fingers barely grazing her cheek. More mornings like this, where you're beside me, facing whatever comes, where I don't have to do it alone. Gal. He kissed her. It was gentle, barely a brush of lips, but it set June's world spinning. When he pulled back, his gray eyes were dark with something that made her breath catch. I'm sorry, he said, though he didn't look sorry. That was... June kissed him back, silencing whatever proper thing he was about to say. This time it wasn't gentle. It was all the fear and relief and growing feeling she'd been trying to deny for weeks. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Ransom rested his forehead against hers. This complicates things. Everything about me being here complicates things, June pointed out. What's one more? He laughed, actually laughed, and the sound transformed his face. For a moment, June glimpsed the man he must have been before loss and responsibility carved those harsh lines. The men will talk, he warned. The men already talk. At least now they'll have something true to say. June, his voice was serious again. I can't offer you anything proper. No marriage, no real home, no... I'm not asking for any of that, June interrupted. I'm just asking for more mornings where we face things together. Can you give me that? His answer was in his eyes, in the way his hands framed her face, in the kiss that was soft as morning light on frost. When Thompson's voice called from outside, looking for his captain, they stepped apart reluctantly. Tonight, Ransom said quietly. After dinner. Walk with me. June nodded, not trusting her voice. As he left the stable, his gait steadier despite his limp, she touched her lips wonderingly. They still tingled from his kiss, like her arm tingled from old wounds. It hurts, but I want more, she whispered to Raven, who snorted and nudged her shoulder. The small stone horse was still clutched in her hand, warm from her grip. More, such a simple word for such a complicated want. But as June went about her day cooking, mending, tending the horses, she found herself smiling. Because sometimes the best things in life were the ones that hurt a little, the ones you had to be brave enough to reach for despite the pain. And June Calloway had never been accused of cowardice. Spring arrived like a miracle after the harsh winter, painting the prairie in shades of green and gold. The annual spring fair in Cedar Ridge was the social event of the season, drawing folks from homesteads 50 miles around. June hadn't planned to attend. She never attended anything that wasn't necessary, but Captain Ransom had other ideas. It's an order, he said over breakfast, his tone leaving no room for argument. The whole outpost is going, morale purposes. Since when do you care about morale? Dixon asked, grinning. Since I have to live with you lot complaining all winter, Ransom replied dryly. Be ready to ride out at noon. June caught his eye as she refilled his coffee. Since that morning in the stable 2 months ago, they'd stolen moments where they could quiet conversations during evening walks, fingertips brushing as she served meals, one memorable kiss behind the supply shed during a thunderstorm, but always careful, always proper in front of the men. I don't have anything to wear to a fair, she said quietly. Your blue dress is fine, he said, then added lower. You'd be beautiful in feed sacks. Heat bloomed in her cheeks, and Thompson coughed to hide what sounded suspiciously like a laugh. By noon, the entire outpost was ready to ride. June had managed to tame her hair into a braid crown and pressed her blue calico until it looked almost respectable. She'd even found a ribbon green, slightly faded, to tie at her throat. "You clean up nice, Miss June," Mills said cheerfully, helping her mount Raven. The ride to town was pleasant, the men in high spirits. Even Ransom seemed lighter, occasionally joining in the banter. June rode beside him, aware of how right it felt, how natural. Cedar Ridge was transformed. Colorful bunting hung between buildings, tables laden with goods lined the streets, and the sound of fiddle music carried on the air. Children ran between the adults' legs, sticky with taffy and wild with excitement. "I haven't seen anything like this since Montana," June breathed, taking it all in. "Stay close," Ransom murmured. "Morrison's men are here." Indeed, she spotted the deputy near the beer tent, his nose still slightly crooked from their last encounter. He saw them too, his expression darkening, but he made no move to approach. The afternoon passed in a blur of pie-eating contests Watson won. To everyone's surprise, horse races Raven would have won if June had entered her. And craft displays. June found herself examining a table of quilts, running her fingers over the intricate stitching. "My mother made quilts," she said to no one in particular. "Did she teach you?" Ransom had appeared at her elbow, hat in hand. "Some, before I got more interested in horses than household arts." She smiled sadly. "Disappointed her terribly." "I doubt that." He picked up a small quilted square, examining it. Mothers rarely stay disappointed in daughters who follow their own paths. Before June could respond, the fiddle music changed to a waltz, and couples began forming up in the makeshift dance area. She watched wistfully. She'd learned to dance years ago, but it had been so long. "Dance with me." June turned to stare at Ransom. "What?" "Dance with me," he repeated, holding out his hand. "Unless you don't know how." "I know how," June said, "but your leg—" "We'll manage one dance." His gray eyes were steady on hers. "Please." June was aware of heads turning as she took his hand, of whispers following them to the dance floor. But once Ransom's arm came around her waist, once they began to move to the music, everything else faded away. He was a surprisingly good dancer despite his limp, leading her with the same steady confidence he brought to everything. June had forgotten this, the simple pleasure of moving to music, of being held without demand or expectation. "People are staring," she murmured. "Let them." He spun her carefully, bringing her back closer than strictly proper. "You know what they see? A scarred woman and a crippled soldier making fools of themselves." His hand tightened on her waist. "They see a beautiful woman in a blue dress dancing with a man who can't take his eyes off her. They see something real in a world full of pretense." "Cal, you don't shrink anymore," he said suddenly. "When people look at you, you used to shrink into yourself, trying to disappear. You don't anymore." June considered this. He was right, somewhere between Montana and here, between grief and new purpose. She'd stopped trying to become invisible. "And you stopped limping." "I still limp." "Not the way you used to, like you were ashamed of it." She met his eyes. "Now you just walk like a man who survived things worth surviving." The music ended, but for a moment they stayed frozen, hands clasped, eyes locked. Then the spell broke as Thompson's voice carried over the crowd. "Cap Miss June, you gotta see this." They found the men clustered around a livestock pen where a horse auction was underway. The current offering was a sorry sight. A mare so thin her ribs showed like ladder rungs, coat dull and patchy, head hanging low. $5, the auctioneer was saying. "Anyone. She's not pretty, but she's breathing. Good for glue. Maybe." June's heart clenched. The mare reminded her painfully of Jasper when she'd first found him, abandoned and forgotten. "Going once." $10, June heard herself say. Every head turned to stare. The auctioneer blinked. Ma'am. $10, June repeated, chin up. She felt Ransom's eyes on her, but didn't look at him. Miss, that horse ain't worth 15. A familiar voice drawled. Morrison stepped from the crowd, his smile mean. If the lady wants a broken nag, let's make her pay for it. 20, June said steadily. 30. 50, Ransom said quietly. Morrison's face flushed. 75. 100. Ransom's voice was calm as discussing the weather. Unless Deputy Morrison would like to explain to Judge Carter why he's harassing military personnel at a public auction. Morrison's jaw worked, but he had no response to that. The auctioneer, clearly uncomfortable with the tension, quickly closed the bidding. As Ransom counted out the bills, June touched his arm. I'll pay you back. You'll do no such thing. He handed her the lead rope. Consider it a very late Christmas gift. The mare, if possible, looked even worse up close. But when June ran her hand down the animal's neck, speaking softly, the mare's ears flickered forward slightly. She's not broken, June said quietly. Just forgotten what it's like to be valued. I know the feeling, someone said. June turned to find the elderly woman from the hotel standing nearby, the one who'd reminded June of her daughter. You did a kind thing, dear. Most would have let her go for glue. As they prepared to leave town, June leading her new charge. She noticed people looking at them differently, not with suspicion or knowing leers, but something like respect. The woman who'd dance in public with her scarred arm showing. The woman who'd spend good money on a worthless horse. The woman who'd captured the attention of a man everyone had written off as married to his duty. You realize everyone will be talking about this for weeks, Thompson said cheerfully as they rode out. Good, Ransom said, surprising them all. Let them talk about something true for once. The ride back was slower with the weak mare in tow, but no one complained. As the outpost came into view in the gathering dusk, Mills started singing an old trail song. Watson joined in, then Dixon, until even Thompson was humming along. June glanced at Ransom, riding beside her in comfortable silence. Thank you, she said softly. For the dance, for the horse, for everything. June. He waited until she looked at him. I told you once I couldn't offer you anything proper. No marriage, no real home. Her heart sank. I remember. I was wrong. He shifted in his saddle, and she realized he was nervous. Calvin Ransom, who faced down hostile deputies and Lakota warriors without flinching, was nervous. I can't offer you much, just a hard life on an army post, a soldier's pay, and a man with too many scars and too much past. But if you'd have me... Yes, June said before he could finish. He blinked. You don't even know what I was asking. Doesn't matter. The answer's yes. Woman, you're supposed to let me finish my proposal, he said, but he was almost smiling. You can finish it later, June said, when we're not surrounded by eavesdropping soldiers pretending they can't hear every word. We ain't eavesdropping, Watson protested. We're just riding really close, for safety. The laughter that followed echoed across the prairie, carrying the sound of family, the kind you choose, the kind forged in harsh land and harder times. That night, after the mare was settled, June had already named her Hope, and the men were gathered around Thompson's contraband, whiskey celebrating. Ransom found June in the stable. About that proposal, he started. June kissed him quiet, then pulled back just enough to speak. I don't need fancy words. Cal, I just need to know that when morning comes, we'll face it together. That's all I've ever needed. Every morning, he promised against her lips. Every blessed morning until they put me in the ground. Good, June whispered. Now stop talking and kiss me properly. We've got a lot of time to make up for. And there in the stable, surrounded by the soft sounds of horses and the distant laughter of their makeshift family, Cal Ransom did exactly that, Because sometimes the best dances were the ones with no music but heartbeats. No steps, but the ones you made up as you went along. Tomorrow there would be forms to file and officials to notify, and probably Morrison making trouble. But tonight, there was just a scarred woman and a limping soldier, proving that broken things could still make something whole. The smell of smoke woke June from restless sleep. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming of Montana again, of the cooking fires her mother used to tend. Then Raven's panicked whinny cut through the night, and June bolted upright. Orange light flickered against her window. Fire! She threw on her boots and coat over her nightdress, bursting out of her shed to find the main building's east wing engulfed in flames. Men were already running with buckets, their shouts mixing with the roar of the fire. "Where's Cal?" June grabbed Thompson's arm as he rushed past. "Still on patrol with Mills and Dixon. They're not due back till dawn." June's heart clenched. 3 men gone, leaving only Thompson, Watson, and Jenkins to fight a fire that was spreading fast in the dry spring wind. "The ammunition stores," Watson yelled. "If the fire reaches—" He didn't need to finish. June ran for the stable, where the horses were screaming in terror. She threw open stalls, dodging hooves and teeth as the panicked animals fled into the night, all except Raven, who stood trembling but trusting, letting June lead her out. "Miss June!" Jenkins appeared, his face black with soot. "Thompson's trap beam fell in the office." June didn't think. She soaked her shawl in the water trough and ran toward the burning building. The heat hit her like a physical force, but she pushed through, following Jenkins's pointing finger. Inside was hell, smoke thick as wool, flames dancing along the walls. June dropped to her knees, crawling beneath the worst of the smoke. She could hear Thompson coughing, cursing, alive. She found him pinned beneath a fallen ceiling beam, his leg bent at an ugly angle. The fire was closing in, eating through Cal's desk, devouring the careful order of his life. "Get out," Thompson wheezed. "That's an order." "I don't take orders from sergeants," June shot back, examining the beam. Too heavy to lift alone. She looked around desperately, spotting an iron pry bar near the gun rack. The metal was already hot when she grabbed it, searing her palms through the wet shawl. June wedged it under the beam and threw all her weight against it. Her bad arm screamed in protest, the scar tissue pulling tight enough to tear. The beam shifted an inch, 2. "Pull yourself out," June shouted over the roar of flames. Thompson dragged himself free just as June's strength gave out. The pry bar clattered away, and she stumbled, vision swimming from smoke and pain. "The window!" Thompson gasped, and together they staggered toward the only exit not blocked by fire. Thompson went first, June pushing him through despite his protests. She was halfway out when a section of roof collapsed behind her, the blast of heat propelling her through the window in a shower of glass and sparks. They hit the ground hard, June rolling to smother the embers on her nightdress. Strong hands pulled her up, dragged her away from the building. "The ammunition!" Someone was yelling. "Everyone back!" They made it 20 yards before the explosion. The blast knocked June flat, dirt and debris raining down. When she could see again, the main building was a pillar of fire reaching toward the stars. "June!" Cal's voice, hoarse with fear. He was off his horse before it fully stopped, running toward her with that hitching gait. "June!" She tried to stand, to reassure him, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. Then his arms were around her, his hands checking for injuries with frantic care. "I'm all right," she managed, though her throat felt scraped raw. "Thompson is alive thanks to you," Cal said roughly. He pulled back to look at her properly, and she saw real fear in his eyes. "When I saw the fire, thought, takes more than fire to kill a Calloway," June said, trying for lightness. His laugh was more like a sob. "Don't joke, not about this." His fingers traced the new burns on her hands, the cuts from the window glass. "You could have died." So could Thompson. I didn't ask Thompson to marry me, Cal said fiercely. I didn't promise Thompson every morning for the rest of my life. Around them, the men were organizing bucket brigades to keep the fire from spreading to the other buildings. But June barely noticed, caught by the raw emotion in Cal's voice. You'd do the same, she said softly. If someone needed help, you'd go, no matter the risk. It's who you are. And you're who you are, he said, resignation mixing with something like wonder. Running into burning buildings, taming wild horses, making broken soldiers remember how to hope. Cal, I didn't think I was worth saving, he said suddenly, echoing words from a conversation that felt like years ago instead of weeks. That morning when you kissed me in the stable, I was going to tell you it was a mistake, that you deserved better than a used-up soldier with nothing to offer. And I told you the answer was yes before you even asked the question, June reminded him. I knew what I was choosing. His hands framed her face, thumbs gentle against her soot-stained cheeks. Then choose again, right now, with the outpost burning and everything uncertain. Choose again. Yes, June said simply. Always yes. He kissed her there in the firelight, in front of God and the men and the burning wreckage of their ordered life. When they broke apart, Dixon wolf whistled, earning a cuff from Mills. Save it for the wedding. Cap, someone called, and nervous laughter rippled through the group. Speaking of which, Cal said, not releasing June. We'll need a new plan. All the paperwork just went up in smoke. The paperwork can wait, June said. Right now we need to save what we can and figure out where everyone's sleeping tonight. The next hours passed in a blur of salvage and triage. The main building was a total loss, but they saved the barracks, the stable, and most of the supplies. As dawn broke over the devastation, June found herself making coffee over a cook fire in the yard, the kitchen nothing but charred timbers. Morrison, Thompson said quietly, his splinted leg propped on a crate. Had to be. No other explanation for a fire starting in 3 places at once. Cal nodded grimly. He'd reached the same conclusion. I'll wire Fort Laramie today. Request an investigation and reinforcements. And in the meantime? Dixon asked. In the meantime, we rebuild. Cal's voice was steady, confident. We've got walls, a roof over most of our heads, and the best cook in the territory, even if she has to work outside. We've faced worse. Have we? Watson asked doubtfully. Surveying the ruins. I have, Cal said quietly, his eyes finding June across the fire, and survived it. We all have in our ways. As if to underscore his point, Raven appeared from wherever she'd fled in the night, Hope the rescued mare trailing behind her. Both horses were singed and wild-eyed, but whole. June went to them, running her hands over their sides, whispering reassurances. See, Mills said, a tempting cheer. Even the horses came back. That's got to be a good sign. The horses came back because they know where the food is, June said practically. But she was smiling. As the sun climbed higher, revealing the full extent of the damage, June felt Cal's presence at her shoulder. I'm sorry, he said quietly. About your things, your mother's brush, the letters. They were just things, June said, though the loss ached. I've got what matters. A half-burned outpost and a bunch of soldiers who can't cook. A home, June corrected. A family, odd as it is. And you. She leaned into him slightly, careful of appearances but needing the contact. Though if you ever run into a burning building without me, I'll shoot you myself. Deal, Cal said solemnly. Though the same goes for you. Then we'll just have to run into burning buildings together. June decided, seems safer that way. Cal's laugh was rough but real. Woman, your definition of safe needs work. Probably, June agreed. But you knew that when you proposed. I knew a lot of things when I proposed, Cal said. Knew you were brave and stubborn and beautiful. Knew you could gentle wild horses and face down drunk soldiers. Didn't know you were also completely insane. Having second thoughts? June asked lightly, though her heart stuttered at the possibility. Never, Cal said firmly. Just adding to the list of reasons I love you. It was the first time he'd said the words. June turned to stare at him, soot-stained and exhausted in the morning light. His uniform ruined and his orderly world in ashes around him. I love you too, she said simply, even if you can't keep your outpost from burning down. Thompson, Cal called, not looking away from June. You're my witness. She's marrying me, even though I can't keep the place from burning down. Witnessed, Cap, Thompson called back, though maybe wait till we got a roof before you make it official. The laughter that followed was tired but genuine. They'd lost the building, but not what made it matter. As June turned back to her makeshift kitchen, planning how to feed everyone with half their supplies, she felt a strange lightness. Let Morrison have his petty revenge. Let the world throw fire and rumors and everything else at them. She'd chosen this life, these people, this man. And June Calloway had never been one to run from her choices, even when they came with flames and soot and the promise of hard rebuilding ahead. Especially then, the rebuilding took 3 months. 3 months of sweat and sawdust, of makeshift meals cooked over open fires, of sleeping under stars when the barracks overflowed with supplies. But slowly, steadily, the outpost rose from its ashes. Cal had been wrong about one thing. The paperwork hadn't all burned. Judge Carter himself arrived from Fort Laramie with the proper forms, along with news that Morrison had been arrested for arson and attempted murder. The evidence had been overwhelming once they started looking. Now, on a September morning with the sky stretched endless blue above them, June stood in her small room in the newly built quarters, staring at the simple dress Thompson's wife had sent from back east. It was nothing fancy cream-colored cotton with tiny blue flowers, but it was new and clean and hers. You ready, miss? Thompson called through the door. His leg had healed crooked, giving him his own permanent limp, but he'd insisted on walking her down the aisle. Cap's about to wear a hole in the ground with his pacing. June smoothed the dress one more time and opened the door. Thompson's eyes went suspiciously bright. Don't you dare cry, June warned. You'll set me off, and I refuse to meet Cal with a red nose. Wouldn't dream of it, Thompson said gruffly, offering his arm. Though you should know the whole outpost's been taking bets on whether the captain will make it through the ceremony without kissing you. What are the odds? 3 to 1 against... Man's not known for his patience. June laughed, feeling the last of her nerves settle. This was right. This was home. They'd set up the ceremony space outside, between the stable and the main building. Someone, probably Mills, had strung wildflowers between the posts, and rough benches held the small gathering. A few townspeople had come, including the elderly woman who'd been kind to June that day at the hotel. The Lakota chief had even sent a representative, Joseph Crow Feather's father, in honor of the woman who'd saved his son. But June only had eyes for Cal. He stood at the makeshift altar in his dress uniform, the one he'd had to borrow from Fort Laramie after the fire. His gray eyes found hers across the distance, and the look in them made her forget to breathe. Ready, Thompson whispered. Since the day I arrived, June whispered back. The ceremony was simple. Judge Carter spoke about commitment and courage, about building something lasting in a harsh land. When he asked if anyone objected, Dixon loudly cleared his throat. Just wanted to say, Dixon announced, that if anyone had told me that first day that I'd be standing here watching the captain marry our cook, I'd have called them touched, but Miss June, you've made believers of us all. Cap's a lucky man. The luckiest, Cal agreed, his voice carrying clearly. When Judge Carter pronounced them married, Cal didn't wait for permission. He pulled June close and kissed her thoroughly, earning cheers from the men and a resigned sigh from the judge. I see why the odds were against you making it through, June murmured against his lips. "What can I say? I'm not good at waiting for what I want." He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. "And I've wanted this since the day you stood in my office, covered in trail dust, and told me you didn't need anyone to like you. And now I need you to like me enough for a lifetime." "Just like," June teased. "That's all." "Woman, you know full well it's more than like." Cal growled, but he was smiling. "It's love and need, and thank God every morning that you're stubborn enough to stay." The celebration was perfect in its imperfection. Mills had attempted a cake that was lopsided but sweet. Watson played his harmonica while couples danced on the packed earth. Even the horses seemed to understand, whinnying whenever the crowd cheered. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, June found herself standing apart for a moment, watching the scene, her family, the one she'd chosen and built from ashes and determination. "No regrets." Cal appeared at her elbow, 2 cups of Thompson's notorious punch in his hands. "About marrying a soldier with too many scars and too much past," June quoted back to him. "Never." "Good, because I have something for you." He pulled a small package from his pocket, wrapped in brown paper. "It's not much, but—" June opened it carefully, her breath catching at what lay inside. A necklace, simple but beautiful, made from an old horseshoe nail heated and shaped into a heart. Beside it lay a small piece of charred wood, polished smooth. "The nail's from Raven's first shoeing here," Cal explained, "and the wood—" "From the fire," June finished softly. "From the old building. Thompson helped me make it, said every marriage needs something old and something new." This seemed to cover both. June turned so he could fasten it around her neck, the metal warm against her skin. "It's perfect." "There's an inscription," Cal said, "on the back of the wood." June turned the piece over, squinting in the fading light to read the tiny carved words, "It hurts, but I want more." "Cal," she breathed, remembering that day in the stable, the first time he'd really seen her. "Because that's what love is, isn't it?" Cal said quietly. "It's choosing the hurt because what comes with it is worth everything. It's wanting more, even when it costs." "Yes," June said simply. "Always yes." He spun her into the dancing, and June laughed as her cream dress flared around her boots. Around them, their makeshift family celebrated. Thompson with his crooked leg, Mills with his perpetual cheer, Dixon with his gruff acceptance, Watson with his hard-learned courage. "Look," Cal murmured in her ear, and June followed his gaze to the stable. Raven and Hope stood at the fence, watching the festivities with interested eyes, as if sensing the attention. Raven tossed her head and whinnied, a sound of pure satisfaction. "Even the horses approve," June said. "Smart animals." Cal's arm tightened around her waist. "They know a good thing when they see it." As the stars began to appear, pricking through the darkening sky, June thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a burned ranch in Montana to a half-destroyed outpost in Wyoming. From a woman hiding her scars to one who wore them like badges of honor. From alone to surrounded by family. "Dance with me," Cal said, though they were already dancing. "We are dancing." "No." He pulled her closer, until they were barely moving, just swaying together under the vast western sky. "Really dance with me, here, now, and every day after." "Every day," June promised. "Even the hard ones, especially the hard ones." "I love you, June Ransom," Cal said, and hearing her new name on his lips made her shiver. "And I love you, Calvin Ransom, scars, limp, and all." Then we're well matched. He gestured to where her scarred arm rested on his shoulder, his own damaged leg supporting them both. 2 broken pieces making something whole. "Not broken," June corrected, thinking of young Joseph Crowfeather, of Morrison's defeat, of Thompson pulling through the fire, of Hope growing sleek and strong. Just tested, proven, strong enough to bear the weight. "Sweetheart," Cal said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're stronger than a Mustang." June kissed him then. There under the stars, with their friends cheering and the horses calling and the rebuilt outpost standing testament to what determined people could accomplish together. When they finally broke apart, the party was winding down. One by one, the men drifted off to their bunks, calling out final congratulations. The townspeople climbed into their wagons for the ride home. Even the horses settled for the night, Raven and Hope standing hip to hip in companionable silence. Finally, it was just June and Cal, standing in the quiet aftermath of joy. "Ready to go home?" Cal asked. June looked around at the stable where she'd learned to trust again, at the new building raised by willing hands, at the vast prairie that no longer seemed empty but full of possibility. "I am home," she said simply. Cal lifted her hand, kissing the ring that now graced her finger. Nothing fancy, just a band forged by the blacksmith at Fort Laramie, but precious beyond measure. "Then let's go to our home," he amended, gesturing toward the small married quarters they'd added to the new building. "Start this life proper." As they walked together across the packed earth, June's dress rustling in the night breeze. She thought she heard her mother's voice on the wind, warm with approval. Her father's too, gruff but pleased. They paused at the door of their new home, and Cal looked down at her with those steady gray eyes that had seen too much but still found room for wonder. "No regrets?" he asked again. "Just one," June said seriously. His brow furrowed. "What?" "That it took me so long to get here." She reached up to touch his face, feeling the slight roughness of his jaw, the warmth of his skin. But then again, maybe we both needed the journey. Maybe we both needed to break a little before we could fit together right. "Maybe so," Cal agreed, turning his head to kiss her palm. "But we're here now. That's what matters." "That's what matters," June echoed, and let her husband, lead her across the threshold into their new life. Outside, the Wyoming stars wheeled overhead, keeping their ancient watch. In the stable, Raven snorted softly, contentedly, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate, a wild sound that spoke of freedom and fierce devotion. June Calloway, June Ransom now, had ridden out of Montana with nothing but grief and a half-wild horse. She'd found a home, a family, a love worth fighting for. She'd learned that sometimes the best things came from the hardest journeys, that strength wasn't about being unbreakable, but about choosing to rebuild, again and again. And as Cal's arms came around her in their simple room, as his lips found hers in the darkness, June knew with bone-deep certainty that every scar, every hurt, every hard mile had been worth it. Because this man, this place, this life was hers, fought for, earned, chosen. And June Ransom had never been one to run from her choices. She never would be. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope June and Cal's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while telling it. Where are you listening from? Please share in the comments below. I'd love to know where in the world this tale of the American frontier has traveled. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 for more tales of courage, love, and adventure from the untamed American West. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button and support us by clicking the hype button so more people can discover these heartfelt frontier tales. Until next time, partners.